On this episode of the podcast, I have Joshua Erickson back on to continue our series on the Jewish calendar and feast days. Now, as always, I strongly recommend that if you haven't listened to the previous episodes in this series, you go back and do that first. The reason is that these celebrations build on top of each other. Those episodes would be numbers 27, 28, and 30. This time around, Joshua Erickson and I break down Hanukkah. We dive into the history of the festival and how it is celebrated today. As we discuss these things, there are fascinating ties to Joseph Smith, as well as some pretty stark parallels for our day concerning Mormonism and even some fundamentalist prophecy. Stick around for that and more on this episode of the Mormon Renegade Podcast. So I just want to take a moment to thank you, the listener. When I started this podcast, I wasn't sure if anyone would really listen. Now, to my surprise, this thing has taken on a life of its own. And that's all due to you, the listener, spending your time here with me, and it means a great deal to me. Now, as a husband and father, I'm keenly aware of how important time is. It feels like there's just never enough of it. So when you are spending your time here listening to this podcast, I feel a responsibility to never waste your time. In that spirit, as this podcast has grown, I feel like I need to do you, the listener, justice. I want to continue to produce good content and upgrade the audio quality. That takes better equipment and better software, and that all takes money. Now, I've tried to advertise, but you'd be surprised. There's not a lot of people wanting to advertise on a Mormon Fundamentalist podcast. I know, surprising, right? Now, if you want to help support the podcast, you can do that one of two ways. The first is go over to MormonRenegade.com and hit the Donate tab. There you can make a one-time donation, or you can go ahead and set it up to be a monthly recurring donation. Your choice entirely. Now, option number two, because I'm a capitalist, if you want to head on over to MormonRenegade.com, click on the store button, you're going to find that we've got some new swag out. We got some t-shirts, we have a tote, we have cell phone cases, water bottles, coffee cups. We got a bunch of stuff, and more is going to be on the way. So, if you feel like that's something you could do, again, head on over to Mormon Renegade and check all that stuff out. If you're not in that position to do so, I completely understand. We're all squeezed right now with high gas prices and high inflation. So even if you can't, please keep listening and maybe keep the podcast in your prayers so we can continue to grow, produce good content, and better audio quality. Thank you.
You're listening to the Mormon Renegade Podcast.
Welcome back to the Mormon Renegade Podcast. As always, you can get a hold of me either by email at mormonrenegade@gmail.com. You can also get a hold of me on Instagram and Twitter and Getter under the handle Mormon Renegade. Also, we have a website up, and that's mormonrenegade.com, so go check that out. Well, Joshua, man, thanks for coming back on again.
Glad to be here. Repeat offender.
Repeat offender. That's all right. You can come back anytime you want, man.
I appreciate the open invitation.
Yeah, there's always a spot for you here, so don't worry about that. Oh, feel free to come down anytime. So we're going to talk about Hanukkah today.
Mm-hmm.
And everything in me, it was so hard not to want to play the Hanukkah song by Adam Sandler before we got started. But real quick, is this kind of the last holiday in the Jewish calendar?
The last one is going to be Purim. So
Purim, okay.
Yep. Before the New Year, which is before the ecclesiastical New Year, which is the first month when Passover is. So Purim is the last.
Gotcha. So we got one more to do after this. I'm looking forward to that.
That's right. One more, and then we'll start. Yeah.
I have no idea what that is, so that one will be really cool.
Okay. Yeah.
I have a little bit of an idea on what Hanukkah is, but probably not as much as you. So what's the history of Hanukkah?
History of Hanukkah. So there's the Old Testament stops about 400 years before the New Testament begins. So there's this gap, which is called by historians the intertestamental period. And Hanukkah the story of Hanukkah occurs in this intertestamental period. It's actually, to go back to Nebuchadnezzar's vision, he has his dream, right, where he sees the statue with the gold head and the silver arms and chest and the brass belly and thighs, and then the legs of iron, and then the feet that are iron mixed with clay.
Okay.
And this story, the story of Hanukkah, takes place with the belly and the thighs of brass, really.
So was the bellies and the thighs of brass? What do those represent?
And that represents the kingdom of Greece.
Okay.
So all of these things that Nebuchadnezzar saw and Daniel interpreted, these are all kingdoms that were going to occupy Jerusalem, basically, at one point or another. And started out with Nebuchadnezzar. He was the head of gold, which was Babylon. And then the two silver arms were the Medes and the Persians.
Okay.
And then who conquered Babylon. And then they were conquered in turn by Greece, which was the brass. And then Greece was in turn conquered by Rome, of course, which was the iron.
And so Hanukkah takes place during that time of Grecian occupancy. So
that's right. So the Old Testament kind of, we get into the Babylonian captivity, and then in the book of Daniel, he talks about, the Medes and the Persians are there as well. But then the Old Testament goes quiet, and then we pick it back up with Rome being in charge of the Holy Land.
Right.
And so we kind of skip over the brass part of the sculpture.
Yeah, we don't hear a lot about the Grecian occupation. And I mean,
Right.
realistically, unless you've gotten into the book of Maccabees or something like that, it's almost, it's strange in the sense that, especially to the Christian world, and I would lump Mormons in with that there, it's almost a forgotten time period for us.
It is. And the reason why that is because Christians, especially Protestants, only Protestants, have deleted the Apocrypha from the Bible.
Right.
So I guess I should say a little bit about the Apocrypha, because the Apocrypha actually comes about, as far as we know, during this time. Most of the Bibles that we had, the King James Version and the NIV and the NASV and a bunch of kind of modern translations, maybe all the major modern translations anyway, they translate from what's called the Masoretic text, which is the Hebrew version of the Old Testament, and it's actually surprisingly recent. So when you think about the Hebrew Bible, I mean, this thing is thousands of years old, but the copy that everything is translated from is basically goes back to the Leningrad Codex. The Leningrad Codex was made sometime around 1000
Wow.
AD, and so all our Bibles go to this source that was compiled in 1000 AD.
So this Grecian occupation of the Holy Land, is it Alexander the Great? Who is it?
Yeah, started with Alexander. That's right. Alexander was pretty amazing. He actually had, his father was Philip of Macedonia. And Philip had a few wives. I think Alexander was from his fourth wife. But when she conceived, she actually had this vision, like in a dream. In a dream, a lightning bolt like struck her stomach.
Wow.
And from her stomach came this fire that like burned the whole world and then faded away, And which of course, Alexander.
That's a lot to live up to. As
Those
a
are big
kid,
shoes.
yeah.
Yeah, big shoes to fill. So Philip was murdered, if I remember right, and Alexander came to power when he was just 20 years old.
Wow.
And his father had aspirations to expand the Grecian Empire, and had those aspirations for his son Alexander, and he filled those shoes very proficiently. Let's say Alexander was amazing.
Now, Maccabees, which talks about this Grecian occupation, if I'm not mistaken, it wasn't the primary guy who was ruling the place at that time, though, wasn't Alexander. It was a guy named Antiochus Epiphanes, right?
Boo. Yeah.
Right.
In my house, anytime someone says Antiochus Epiphanes, and everyone says boo.
We do that here, except usually it's with Woodrow Wilson.
Boo.
But, yeah, exactly. But
yes.
But so Alexander, he conquers the Holy Land. Alexander conquers a lot of ground. I mean, he's out. This is not a homebody. This guy is out there, and
that's right.
He's going to town. But it's, in my estimation, he was pretty hands off with the local population during his time, right? Alexander's time.
He was actually, as far as emperors go, was a fairly good guy.
Right.
Josephus records his entrance into the Holy Land, and the people in Jerusalem, the Jews, they knew that they were going to be incorporated, into the Grecian kingdom empire, and so there's not really any use in putting up a fight, and they decided just to submit instead. And when Alexander approached Jerusalem, basically, the high priest, whose name was Jaddua at the time, the plan was everyone is going to, we're all going to be fasting and praying, and everyone's going to put on their white clothes, and everyone's going to go out to the streets and just bow down and welcome Alexander with celebration and stuff. And so Alexander goes through the streets, and he's just met by all these people dressed in white and welcoming him, and he gets up to the temple, and the high priest comes out, and he's all dressed in his priestly garments as well. And the high priest wore a crown on his turban that said "Holiness to the Lord" across it on a gold plate that would wear on his head. And Alexander, when he saw the high priest wearing that, then it was brought to his memory about like a dream that he had had. He had had a dream that when he saw that high priest come out, that he was supposed to respect these people, and so he just totally spared them, and there was no bloodshed or anything, and he basically supported the temple there. He's like, I'm gonna contribute to the work you're doing, and everything went really well under Alexander. Now he died at a young age. It took him, he was 32 or 33, I think. I can't remember. Basically, he, like I said, he became king at 20 and started his worldwide campaign, which took about a decade. He basically conquered the whole known world and was basically undefeated in battle. And this is actually the cool thing about Hanukkah is there's, it's not one of the feasts that the Lord commands Israel to keep, like Passover and Tabernacles and so on. But it is talked about in the Old Testament, most notably in the book of Daniel.
Right.
So I'm going to read just a little bit about Daniel here, or from Daniel. This is in Daniel chapter 8. Let's see. Sorry. So I lifted up, this is Daniel speaking. I lifted up my eyes, he's having this vision. I saw, and there stood before the river a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. And so he actually goes on later on to an interpretation of this dream is given. And the ram, this is in verse 20, the ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia. So the Medes and the Persians. And I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. And as I was considering this ram, behold, a he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river. And the ram said unto him, ran unto him in the fury of his power, and I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones towards the 4 winds of heaven. So later on, in verse 21, it says, the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. So this is Alexander the Great.
Okay.
He was the goat was Greece, and the one horn that the goat had was Alexander, and he says he flew across the world like it looked like the goat was flying because his feet didn't even touch the ground. And this is the way that Alexander conquered the world, basically. But he died at a young age. He came down with some kind of sickness. Historians speculate whether that was some natural illness or whether he'd been poisoned.
Right.
We don't know. But he died, and when he died, basically the kingdom was split into 4 parts, which Daniel predicts here. He says the one horn was broken off, and then 4 horns came up in its place.
So is it Antiochus Epiphanes?
He was not. Yes. Well, he comes next. And out of one of those 4 horns came a little horn, which waxed exceedingly great, toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of hosts, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And it goes on, it says in verse 13, talks about the transgression of desolation, and how long would the sanctuary be trodden underfoot. And this is talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. So he was, the 4 branches of the Grecian kingdom were basically Syria,
okay,
which is where Antiochus comes from. And then there was Egypt, and then there was Turkey and Greece.
Okay, so Antiochus Epiphanes is not Grecian. He's Syrian.
Well, it's the Greek Syrian Empire.
Okay.
So and then in Egypt it was the Greek Egyptian, like it was the land of Egypt, but under Greek control.
Okay. So Alexander, he comes through, and he just basically cleans up. I mean, nobody really stands a chance against him. In fact,
like dominoes.
Yeah, and really, I from my understanding, about the time he's halfway done, most other kingdoms are like, he seems cool as long as we don't screw with him. So let's just understand this is happening, and then let's see if we can't just play nice with him, and then maybe he will play nice, which seems to be the case. He did, right? Yeah. To the point he leaves the Jews alone in Jerusalem and says, "You do your thing. You're going to pay your taxes to me, but other than that, I'm going to leave you alone."
Yeah. So
exactly right. It goes along well there, and then he dies. And it's amazing this is all foretold by Scripture, too. I think that's really cool.
It is amazing.
And then from there, Antiochus Epiphanes comes into play.
That's right.
And let's talk about him a little bit. What's his deal?
He's a really bad man. He actually, and he has as many of these emperors do, he has a god complex. And his name is Antiochus, which is the name of his father. But the title that he takes on is Theos Epiphanes, and just Epiphanes for short. But his name is Antiochus, God manifest, like God has appeared. That was his Antiochus, the God has appeared. That was the name that he gave himself.
I thought about guys like that. And the one thing I'll say is they have to be motivated. Because, again, that's a lot to live up to, right? Yeah. I have no desire to be that worshipful. But I do find it interesting that this same pattern emerges time and time again, which is you might have one really benevolent, really good king or leader that really loves his people. but there's no guarantee about that second one.
Amen.
Right? And so I wanted to point that out because it's something that we continue to see, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that the one guy might be totally cool, but the guy behind him, well, that guy, we don't know, and it could be bad.
That is the reason we don't give the good guy all the power.
Exactly.
If we can help it.
Absolutely. There's only been a couple of guys I can think of that took that kind of power and then returned it. One was Washington, and then
George.
the other was and Lincoln didn't even go fully back, but he gave most of it back after the Civil War. And so those men are extremely rare. And once that power gets installed in somebody, it's there forever. And you can see
we
that.
have learned by sad experience.
Yeah,
the nature and disposition of
we can
almost
see
all
that
men.
with Antiochus Epiphanes to a
yeah.
T. So he comes into power. When does he start really messing with the Israelites?
Yeah, he this story takes place in the 160s BC. So he has ambitions. Actually, all of these generals, the four generals that these four kingdoms that kind of come out of Alexander's Greece, they all fight with each other for supremacy, constantly, like generation after generation. They're having wars with each other, trying to kind of put back together Alexander's kingdom, which never happens. And eventually Rome comes along and puts a big nope on the whole thing. And Rome does it. Rome does succeed, but these little smaller Greek kingdoms, they never do. So Antiochus Epiphanes, he's got Egypt in his sights. And of course, between Syria in the north and then Egypt in the south, the kingdom of Israel is right there in between. And so, and sometimes the Greek Egyptians, they're in charge, and sometimes the Syrian Greeks are in charge, and Israel's kind of back and forth there. And Daniel talks about that too. He talks about the king of the north and the king of the south, and these intrigues that are going to happen there. So so Antiochus is actually goes down to Egypt, and he actually beats up on Ptolemy, who's the king in Egypt. All of the kings in Egypt are named Ptolemy. So he beats him up. And he goes down again another time to battle. And when he's down there the second time, I believe, the second campaign he's down there, there's a single Roman gentleman who has a message from the Roman Senate. And basically, this single Roman messenger basically tells Antiochus, we want you to leave Egypt, and Egypt is no longer going to be a concern of yours, and we would like you to tell us, give us your intentions towards Egypt. Now that you know our intentions. And Antiochus says he'll have to discuss it with his council, and the Roman guy takes a stick or a sword, or I don't know, whatever, and draws a circle around Antiochus in the sand and says, before you leave the circle, you'll give an answer to the Roman Senate. And Antiochus is not very happy about this, but realizes that he'll probably just leave Egypt alone from now on.
Yeah, because he really doesn't have a choice, right? Because Rome is at the height of its power, and it's got a lot of power. It's got money. Yes. It can fund these excursions.
That's right.
For in perpetuity. And so Antiochus, recognizing that the Grecian Empire is already fractured, he doesn't have the wherewithal to go toe-to-toe with Rome.
That's right. Not at all. And so interesting thing is back up in Jerusalem at this time, and this is in I believe this is in Second Maccabees. First and Second Maccabees, they overlap in a lot of their storytelling. So let me just go there. All right, so I found it. So it's in Second Maccabees chapter 5. It's interesting. While Antiochus was down in Egypt, the folks up in Jerusalem actually had this collective vision, and is reported. I'll just read it here. This is the Good News translation of the Apocrypha here. So, about this time, Antiochus IV made a second attack against Egypt. For nearly 40 days, people all over Jerusalem saw visions of cavalry troops in gold armor charging across the sky. The riders were armed with spears and their swords were drawn. They were lined up in battle against one another, attacking and counterattacking. Shields were clashing. There was a rain of spears and arrows flew through the air. All different kinds of armor and the golden bridles of the horses flashed in the sunlight, and everyone in the city prayed that these visions might be a good sign. So it's actually a really interesting vision. Now they didn't know what this meant, but there was, when they said it was a good sign, they hoped that meant that Antiochus had been defeated. Right. Now Antiochus was kind of defeated, but he was certainly not killed, and that was kind of the rumor that had gone on, and when Antiochus made his way back up north, he found Jerusalem kind of in disarray, and people weren't necessarily celebrating, but there was, because of the rumors of his death, there was kind of some riots and some things happening in Jerusalem, and that did not make him happy. That they kind of assumed that he had been killed in battle.
So was he mistreating Israel prior to this episode? So this is very much the impetus for him being like.
So he was in a bad mood from his interaction with Rome.
I was just going to say, to put everything into context, this is a guy who just got humiliated.
That's right.
Right.
He's like, I have my army, and my army is going to destroy something.
Right.
And I've been thwarted in Egypt, so.
So then he finds the Jews who never really have at least since the time of David, a really good standing army.
Yeah.
I've often looked at ancient Israel and thought they have a lot of great special forces, so to speak. We see that where there's
David's
small
men and stuff. Yeah.
They're small bands that are really good at kind of counterinsurgency sort of stuff. But then you don't have the standing army where you're just going to go toe to toe with somebody, and so they're probably a good target to take some of that frustration out on. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or at least that's how Antiochus is looking at it. Like, that's exactly. I just got humiliated. From this point forward, I'm ruling with an iron fist.
Yeah. Now he had started some of the mystery. It's kind of a complicated story because there was Greek interference and Greek oppression, which hadn't really started until this event. But there was also this internal factions. Because there was a group of Jews who were Hellenized, so they loved Greek culture and were wanting Israel to just to fully embrace the Greekness of everything.
Just to assimilate.
To assimilate. Yeah, that's exactly the word. And so the story of the Maccabees and Hanukkah is, in one sense, an international thing where they're fighting against the Greeks, but there's also a civil war that's going on simultaneously. They're fighting with each other over whether or not we're going to just accept Greek customs and laws and abandon the Torah and the law and the God of our fathers.
So before we dive too much into Maccabees and who they are, let's set the stage for what Antiochus Epiphanes does. If you're a Torah believing Jew of that time, what's Antiochus Epiphanes doing within Israeli society?
So up until this point, there had been, like I said, there had not been the kind of overt oppression, but there was all kinds of intrigue. Actually, the high priest, the position of high priest, and the whole Jewish priesthood just became utterly corrupt. So there was actually the guy who should have been the guy who should have been the high priest, his name was Onias III. And he was actually deposed. There was another guy named Jason. His name was actually Yeshua or Jesus, but he changed his name to Jason because he wants to be Greek. And he actually bribed, I guess, offered Antiochus money if Antiochus would forcibly give him the position of high priest over Jerusalem. So Antiochus did that, and then Jason was in charge, and he basically did not. Onias III was against the Hellenization, and Jason was in favor of it, and so Jason kind of started to do all the Greek things. He built a gymnasium there, where they would all, play their Olympic games and stuff in the nude,
Right, which is, and in my reading, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is a time where Epiphanes seems to be saying, look, you're going to Hellenize. You are going...
Not yet, but it is...
It's getting to that point.
It's already... Right? Yeah, and this is how... I think this is how governments work, right? There's these social changes that start to creep in, and when there's, when they get 50% support or something, right, then they enforce it. And that's kind of what was happening, I guess you could say, is that there was this, not a required, but just a naturally occurring trend in society to adopt Hellenistic ways. And then there's enough support, and also Antiochus is pissed off at those who are not voluntarily doing it, that he says, we're going to make this compulsory. Yeah.
One of the reasons I love the story of the Maccabees and Hanukkah is because I think there are some echoes in there, if not some direct talk about protecting your beliefs.
Oh, absolutely.
And I find that we might be coming to a time that's very similar in the sense of you're going to adopt this new society. And I think we need to look at Maccabees, not necessarily for their violence, but for their, because I don't think we're at that time yet, right? I want to make that very clear. But I think we do need to be just as resolute about holding on to our culture and to our God and to our religion, because we're right there. And we saw that, and this is why this episode probably won't go on YouTube. But we saw something very similar with the vaccine mandate, right? You're going to comply.
Absolutely.
You're going to comply. Let's talk a little bit about what Antiochus does in terms of the temple, the kosher dietary laws,
right? Because
I think there's some significant parallels there.
So he kind of destroys. Well, there's some intrigue there between Jason, as I said, who kind of bribed, paid for the position of high priest. He actually sends one of his guys, whose name's Menelaus, who's not even of the tribe of Levi. He's a Benjamite. Sends him to go make a payment, and Menelaus takes the opportunity to outbid Jason and says, hey, I've got all this money, plus I'll give you more when we go back if you send soldiers back with me and put me in as the high priest. Antiochus says, sounds great. And they're part of the squabble that caused made Antiochus lose his temper was this squabble between Jason and Menelaus. But anyway, Antiochus puts Menelaus in position as high priest, and then Menelaus, in order to pay the bribe that he had promised, goes into the temple and takes some of the temple treasures, basically, to pay for his new position as high priest. Okay, now Antiochus is also realizing that there's a bunch of Jews and probably maybe some people in other parts of his kingdom who don't really like assimilating. And so he makes a law that everyone in my kingdom is going to be Greek in their customs, in their dress, and in their worship. And everyone will worship the same gods. And he basically made this, I mean, the parallels are remarkable, because here we have a tyrant who wants basically a one world government. He wants everyone to be good global citizens.
Yep.
And the Jews say, we are not going to do that. Some of them anyway, those who resist. And he says, yes, you will not do anything detectably Jewish. Any detectably Jewish thing you do will be punished by death and torture. So yeah, you are not allowed to keep the Sabbath. You are not allowed to observe Passover. You are not allowed to have the scriptures with you. If you get caught with the scriptures, we will destroy those and then torture and kill you. You're not allowed to circumcise your children. You're not allowed. You must eat unclean things. Not only that, you must eat unclean things that have been offered to the Greek gods. So like doubly awful. And it was, and he basically reigned with blood and horror, to borrow a phrase, and made a concerted effort to stamp out the Jewish religion, if not the people.
I read a book, and it wasn't like the book of Maccabees, but it was a book that was kind of commentary on the Maccabees. It was told from kind of like a story kind of perspective.
Yeah.
And the things he does are absolutely atrocious. He debases the temple.
Yeah, I didn't even get to that.
Oh,
yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
I didn't mean to.
No, you're fine. Yeah, it's awful because he actually, the temple is also must be debased, and he actually captures the temple on the 15th of Kislev, which is the 9th biblical month. And then after he captures the temple, he sets up an altar to Zeus, like on top over the altar to Jehovah. And also inside the temple, he sets up an idol to Zeus. And the accounts of it say that this statue of Zeus actually was a self-portrait of Antiochus.
No, of course it was. Yeah,
this is amazing. Which is all. So then on the 25th of Kislev, he actually does what Daniel calls and what Maccabees calls the abomination of desolation, and he actually offers swine to Zeus on the altar in the temple, and then takes the blood of the pig and spreads it in the Holy of Holies and over everything in the temple, and just totally defiles it. And and basically the temple just becomes this like bar and brothel. Yeah. They set up like prostitution is there, and they just have drinking parties and orgies, and they just are just praying and offering to these idols and stuff in the temple. And it's just everything is just utterly filthy and defiled and desolate. And so that is what Daniel refers to, as I said, as the abomination of desolation. And Jesus talks about this in the New Testament, in like Matthew 24. Before I get to that, it's an interesting thing about the scriptures. You know, when we talk a lot, I think, in our meetings and in our study, and you read commentaries and books and stuff, and there's a lot of talk about types and shadows of Christ. And a lot of the ancient prophets, pieces of their life kind of match, things that the Savior would do. For example, if I say there was this promised child that was born, and there was a wicked king who wanted to kill the promised child, so he killed all the babies, but this chosen child was saved by going to Egypt. And then who am I talking about?
You're right. You're talking about Herod.
Right. Or I'm talking about Moses.
Right.
And the things that happened with Pharaoh. Right.
Right.
And Moses's infancy kind of mirrors Jesus' infancy.
Right.
So Moses in that way is a type of Christ. And so now the scriptures talk about the Antichrist as well, the anti-Messiah. And there are types and shadows of the Antichrist as well. And Antiochus Epiphanes is that. He is perhaps the strongest type and shadow of the true Antichrist, which is yet to come. And there are others too, other types and shadows.
And he doesn't stop at just defiling the temple. I read one account where he would go out to kind of the outlying areas of Jerusalem, Galilee being one of them, and like finding the rabbi and cooking up a pig and being like, "You're going to eat this or I'm going to kill your family."
That's right. Yeah. And it was kind of a double-edged thing. It's like, if you don't, then you and your family will be not just killed, but tortured. I mean, there's in the book of 2 Maccabees in particular, there's several of the martyrdoms that are detailed in gruesome detail. And there's kind of two famous sets. There's one, this elderly man named Eleazar, and it's this very thing. They go out to all the outlying cities and they set up pagan altars and they offer something to Zeus or whatever, and they say, "Everyone come and partake, so we can all be one, so we can all be good global citizens and be, part of this Greek family." And they would often go to, like you said, the rabbi or to the respected members of those communities and say, "You come up and go first, because then we'll get less resistance," right? And if you do, then we'll shower you with gifts and praise, and you'll get the title "Friend of the King," and we'll give you a reward. And if you don't, then then you're going to die. And Eleazar says, "No, I refuse." And the officials say, they actually tell him, they say, "Okay, let's do this. Why don't you bring your own clean food and come up and just eat that, but pretend to partake of this sacrifice to Zeus. And but you don't actually have to. But we just want you to set an example so that everyone else will do it." And Eleazar basically says, "There's no way I would do that, because all these young people are watching me, and like their blood will be upon my head, if I do this wicked thing." Right. And so he gets tortured and killed. And then the other one is there's a mother with her 7 sons, and they're all like tortured and killed one at a time while the rest of them are watching, and they just all refuse, and it's like gory stuff. They cut off their hands and feet like one at a time. Right. Will you accept Zeus, whatever? Cut out their tongue, and then they like roast them alive in a giant frying pan and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Horrible stuff.
Yeah. And I think here's probably a good point to stop for a second and draw some interesting parallels, right, on this part of the story.
Go for it.
We just got done going through a process where, again, going back to the pandemic, you will submit to this. You will do this. And you're going to do it to be a good global citizen.
That is exactly
and to be united. And one of the things that bugs me the most is when folks in power talk about unity for unity's sake, right? We can even see spots in the Old Testament where the Lord wasn't a fan of just unity for unity's sake. Think about the Tower of Babel, right? Where the people were all of one heart and one mind. And the Lord's like, ooh. Trouble.
Yeah.
Now, if we're all united on godly principles, that's a different animal. But when it's unity for political purposes, for somebody's ego, on wrong principles,
this is the kingdom of the Antichrist,
right,
which is always in opposition,
right? And so we just got done going through that. The other thing that I'm going to say, and this is going to get real spicy.
I like spicy.
We just saw last week the church come out and throw its support behind gay marriage.
Oh boy. I'm going to go there.
I'm going to go there. I'm going to go there. I'm going to go back to when I left the LDS church a few years back. And I had a very candid conversation with my higher up, who was the son of a general authority, a 70.
Okay.
Not going to name names.
All right.
But he asked me a question. He's like, why are you so concerned about the temple changes? What is it about it that really bugs you? And I said, you are paving the way for, and I used the exact term, the abomination of desolation.
That's right.
And he asked what that was. And I said,
what is that? Yeah.
But in 10 years, and this is what I said there. I said, in 10 to 20 years, I think you're going to see gay marriages inside the temple.
Yeah, the church did say this is, quote, the way forward.
Right. Exactly. You had Dallin H. Oaks just a year ago. I remember because I was Christmas shopping with my wife, where I read the story where Dallin H. Oaks said, we're going to have to surrender some things in order to have peace. What left is there at this point?
Oh, there's a few things I can think of.
And so I think we're at a point now where they may not be killing people, but they'll cancel you. They'll erase you that way.
Yeah.
And so there's some very interesting parallels that are happening right now to this.
Yeah.
And it's either you will be a good global citizen or we'll cancel you. We'll erase you from culture. And with the advent of ESG, with the advent of potentially a digital dollar, that time's going to come. And I feel like people at this point need to start preparing for such things, where we can maybe come together and work together, and put some of our differences aside, because we're going to need to rely on each other. There's going to have to be something parallel that's happening if we're going to resist this. And I think we see that bared out in the story of Maccabees as well, right? You get the feeling that there is something parallel happening when the Maccabees when the Maccabees roll up on site, right? It's already been established in there.
There's so much prophetic. It's maybe the most prophetic of the holidays.
Yeah.
Because just the things that Daniel talks about, and Jesus as well. Jesus, of course, in Matthew 24. And we have some additional things in Joseph Smith Matthew there, but Jesus especially says, when you see the abomination of desolation mentioned by Daniel, then you'll know that the temple here in Jerusalem is going to be destroyed and all that. And he talks about, he predicts the destruction of the temple. That happened in 70 AD, right? With Vespasian, I think, and Titus was his son who actually did the deed. And that was foretold in Daniel as well. Daniel talks about the fourth. He talks about these kingdoms as like these metals in the statue, but he also talks about these beasts, and he talks about this fourth beast, which is Rome, and it has 10 horns. And and the 10th one, which was Titus, is the one that is who is also a little horn. So he's also this type of the Antichrist who destroys the temple. Anyways, but Jesus says in Matthew 24 there, he says, you're going to see the abomination of desolation, and then you're going to flee. But he says, but the abomination of desolation is going to happen again in the future. And so watch out for that. And I think there's been multiple fulfillments of it. And I don't know that I don't even know that there's one more. I think there's probably going to be at least several more. One in the temple that's going to be rebuilt in Jerusalem for sure. And I think also the temples of the Latter-day Saints too are going to see this an abomination of desolation. And I think the gay sealing is going to be a likely candidate.
Yeah. Yeah. The only place I could see I may have been wrong there is I misjudged the time. I honestly thought, 10 to 20 years. I wonder if we're that far away at this point, because it's moving with breathtaking speed and it doesn't seem to be slowing down at all.
Yeah. Closer than we've ever been. That's what I like to say.
Yep.
People can make all kinds of predictions and prophecies. And, there's numbers. There's these days and years and times and stuff in Daniel and in Revelation. And
I suck at the game pin the tail on the apocalypse. I always miss it.
It's closer than it's ever been. That's
what
I'm sure. Yep. And we can all see that, right? Everything's accelerating.
Yep, absolutely. So, I find those parallels very interesting. But all right, let's move on. So we've painted the picture of what's going on in Jerusalem under Antiochus, and it is a horror show of massive, massive,
all in the name of unity, and getting along, and everyone being friends. Right? It's the most brutal friendship.
It is. I've often said those relationships are like dysfunctional, abusive marriages. Right? Someone's getting beat up. Yeah. And someone says, if you would just do as I tell you, I wouldn't have to do this. This is your fault. And so I've often said it resembles an abuse of a marriage quite a bit.
That's exactly it.
So when do the Maccabees roll up on site?
Okay, let's
talk about the Maccabees first. Who are they? They're a family, right?
They're a family, yeah. Now the name Maccabee is actually, there's actually a man. He's a priest. His name is Mattityahu, or Mattathias is like his Greek name. And he has 5 sons. And one of them is named Judah, who also has the nickname Maccabee, which means the hammer, which is that's a badass name. I don't know how else to say it. Yeah. And basically this nickname that he has eventually applies to the whole family. This whole family is also called the Hasmoneans. Hasmonean is the name of like the grandfather, like Mattathias' father or grandfather. I can't remember at the moment, but they become the Hasmonean dynasty, is this family, or the Maccabees also they're known by. So these Greek officials, they're going out to the various communities outside of Jerusalem, and they go to the town of Modin, which is where Mattathias and his family live. And the same kind of thing. They set up the altar there, and they offer the swine to Zeus, and they tell Mattathias to come up, and because he's respected elder in this community, and if he will partake first, then they will be friends with the king and get all these presents and perks. But if not, then the bad things will happen. And Mattathias says, "No, I never will. I'm never turn my back on the covenant that my fathers made, with our God." And like while he's giving this speech, there's another priest in the town who like walks up in front of everyone and just goes ahead and partakes of the offering, maybe even offers and partakes right in front of everyone. And Mattathias is so incensed. It's kind of like Phineas in the Old Testament, where he runs a lance through the
right.
What's his name? Achan, I think. No, it's not Achan. Can't remember his name. Anyway, there's that, the story. He brings the Moabite prostitutes into his tent, basically. Anyway, he goes and earns the priesthood forever, he says, by, skewering these evildoers. But so Mattathias basically pulls out his sword and goes and kills the other priest, the other Jewish priest who had just done this wicked thing, and then kills the Greek official, and his sons, they pull out their swords, and there's a few soldiers there, and they basically
go to war,
clean house, and then they destroy the altar, like push it over, and then run away and into the hills. And Mattathias basically says, everyone who values the covenant, like, follow me,
Yeah, and that's the beginning of the insurgency, right?
And then they start an insurgency. That's right. Yep. They go up in the mountains. And and people hear about what had just happened, and I'm sure a lot of people were relieved, that someone finally did something, so that we can put an end to this insanity. Actually, interesting. Speaking of insanity, Antiochus Epiphanes, he had kind of a nickname, which was Epimanes, which is a kind of a play on words, but Epimanes means like madman. So insane. So that's what he was called. Mattathias dies not too much later, like after this whole thing starts. But he dies, and he basically says one of his sons, I think it was Simon. Simon, he's going to be kind of in charge of things generally, but Judah, Maccabee, he's going to be the general. He's going to be in charge of the army and do whatever he says.
So I read something, and I don't know if this is something that you know about, but and this has been years ago. This has been over a decade ago when I read about the Maccabees. But before this goes down, they're kind of known around town, so to speak, as kind of rowdy kids.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
There was some oral tradition that they're kind of the guys who in today's society are overall good guys, but they're a little rough around the edges. They'd be the guy who you'd see at church and would definitely be living the commandments, but maybe pushing things a little bit, right? Yeah. Some louder music being played and just right. just rowdy. They're a different breed, so to speak.
Yeah, not clean shaven.
Not clean shaven. They're kind of marching to their own drum, but yet very, very adherent to the gospel.
Yeah, absolutely. The kind of people that you want to be your friend, actually.
Yeah, probably the guy you want in a fight is kind of the vibe you get. Absolutely. They were kind of always itching, and I know that was one of the things that this historian and author kind of brought out, is that they were kind of known for getting into some fist fights. They didn't seem to shy away a whole bunch from.
No, they did.
From let's throw down a little bit just out of fun more than less, and then they found somebody that really got their ire up. So, as dictators do. They didn't necessarily account for every member of that population, and now you have the Maccabees. So what happens once they run up in the hills?
So they run up the hills.
The dad dies.
Yeah, there's actually several pockets of this resistance people hear about, and people run up into the mountains in different places. Of course, Judea is just mountainous country, so there's plenty of places. But in one instance. There's this group of people up in the mountains, and the Greeks come up on the Sabbath, and they're like, "Hey, come out and eat the, pay homage to Zeus along with the rest of us, or else we're gonna wipe you out." And they're like in caves and stuff, and they basically say, "We're not gonna come out and do that, and leave us alone. We're trying to keep the Sabbath." And so the Greeks just go and slaughter them, and they put up no resistance because they don't want to. It's just this kind of, the pendulum is swinging the other way. They want to have like this radical adherence to, super strict adherence to the law, because that's what they feel like is going to be the antidote, right? So. It's interesting too. So anyway, the Greeks they kill, like, I can't remember, 1 to 3,000 people, something like that, if I remember right. Anyway, several hundred at least, and they just wipe out these people who offer no resistance on the Sabbath. And Mattathias is like, okay, that just happened, and we cannot let that happen again. We're not going to go out to battle on the Sabbath, but if they come to us, we are going to fight even on the Sabbath. And they make that their policy. And basically they start having these battles, and at first they're kind of this ragtag band, and they don't even all have weapons. Like they have pitchforks and kitchen knives, and but they end up defeating one Greek army after another. And then, then they get armor and shields and swords, and Judah himself, he, the first Syrian general, Greek Syrian general that comes against them, he actually takes his sword and uses that as his sword the rest of the time. It's kind of David and Goliath-esque, takes the sword, and kind of Nephi with Laban's sword becomes this like symbol of his generalship, and his authority in the army. Anyway, and so, like, to everyone's surprise and to Antiochus's dismay, eventually they win their independence.
Okay, let me stop you there for a second, because I see another parallel here that I want to point out, and that is oftentimes we tend to look at ourselves and think, should we do something? Right? Now, I'm not talking violence. Let's just put this in the context of the gospel. Should I do something? And the thought always creeps in. You're just one person, or you're just one family. And
Right.
what difference can you make? It always starts with one. People forget that there was a large portion of this country who were loyal to the king,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And not everybody was on board about going to war against England for independence.
Not even close.
It was
Sam
a group.
Adams.
Yeah, it was one dude who first questioned, and from there it caught fire.
That's right.
And so I guess that's something that we have to keep in mind. Yeah, you're right. You're one person. You're one family. But you might be the match that lights the fire.
Yeah, and there will be matches that don't.
Right. And so if you're feeling that pull, do something. Open your mouth. Say something. But don't stand by. I get that it's risky. I understand that very clearly. And I'm not going to reveal it, but there's a price to be paid for doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And we got to be willing to take that step and just open our mouths and talk. So, and I just saw that as a parallel that at some point we need to talk.
Yeah, it's absolutely the case. Like I said, there was plenty of people who just suffered martyrdom.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Eleazar and the mother with her 7 sons. Those are the most famous ones. And there's 2 things that kind of there's this theme through the books of Maccabees for those who are righteous and wanting to keep the covenant. The 2 themes are 1, we have brought this on ourselves, and it is by our own wickedness as a nation. And so the remedy to that is to return, to repent. And even if God continues to punish, they know that if they repent, that God's punishment will not last forever, because we're His people, and He's punishing us to correct us, and it's a good, and it's a necessary thing for us to return. And so that's one thing, is that there's this sense that that the problems are of their own making, and they're to blame. So they don't blame Antiochus. He's like an instrument that God is using to punish them for their own sins. Okay, as a nation.
And that's such a powerful state of mind, because when you say, "What's my role in this?" Well, all of a sudden you're now empowered to make changes.
That's right.
To get back, right?
Right.
So
That's
owning
exactly
it a
right.
little bit.
And then the other thing is there's this theme throughout that this strong belief in the resurrection, and that even if we die, we will die and obtain a better resurrection.
Yep.
And that's it. And we just have faith in that, and that carries us through and allows us to. Actually, I was going to quote earlier. Now's a good time. Actually, I'll go back to the Apocrypha. Some of the reasons why the Apocrypha was taken out. People will say that that the New Testament never quotes from the Apocrypha, which is not true.
All right.
And they'll say, well, even if it does quote, like Jesus never quotes, like maybe like Paul quotes from it, but Jesus never does, which is also not true. And they'll say, the Apocrypha there's nothing in the Apocrypha where there's a prophet who says, "Thus saith the Lord," but is also not true. So anyway, here's just one example. This is Hebrews chapter 11. And there's all these lists of all these trials and accomplishments that people achieved or overcame because of their faith. And in 35 says, "Women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover of bonds and imprisonment. Stoned, sawn asunder, and all that." But anyway, this the verse there, verse 35 especially, tortured so that they might obtain a better resurrection. Like this is universally, like everyone, Bible scholars realize that this is an allusion to Second Maccabees when it talks about the woman with her 7 sons, and their whole motivation is to obtain this better resurrection. And so this is actually another reason, and this will be interesting to Mormons too. Another reason why the Apocrypha was removed is because Martin Luther and a lot of the other reformers did not like some of the things in there, especially Second Maccabees.
And this is something I brought up with Ken Peterson when we were talking about the Apocrypha, was there's a lot of the Old and New Testaments that aren't kind to dictators and kings.
Oh, that is part of it. Yeah.
Right? And this idea that we should just submit at every turn doesn't necessarily hold water with what would be our spiritual heritage, so to speak, right?
Absolutely not.
And I've often said sometimes we paint Christ in pastel colors, but keep in mind, this is a guy who's pissing everybody off around him. The religious structure of the day as well as the political structure.
Absolutely.
And so I think that maybe certain books didn't make it in because it wasn't politically expedient for the dudes in charge. I know that even the Geneva Bible, which put a heavy emphasis on kind of, casting tyrants and kings in bad light, the British hated that Bible. They're like, yeah, we don't use that, and certainly we discourage anybody from using a Geneva Bible for that very reason, because it was extremely anti-authoritarian.
Yeah. That's a thing that I think Latter-day Saints struggle with, to be honest, because, is it the 11th article of faith?
Yeah.
We believe in being subject to kings, magistrates, rulers, and obeying, honoring, and sustaining the law. But our own Doctrine and Covenants has plenty of things like that too. But there's always caveats to that.
Yeah. And the Doctrine and Covenants makes ones, right? The whole purpose of government was to protect the rights of men.
Protect the rights. And it says, it's like, I think it's section 134 or 135, says that sedition is unbecoming of every citizen who is thus protected in their rights.
Right.
Like, as long as you're protected in your rights, then sedition is a no-no.
Right.
But there is definitely an opening there for, if your rights are being trampled, though, then God bless you, for resisting. The story of the Maccabees is really summed up nicely with Thomas Jefferson's motto, Benjamin Franklin, right? Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
Can I get an amen? Yeah.
Can I get an amen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we need to be very careful how we apply the 11th article of faith. Certainly I'm not espousing for violence. Let's get that out of the way right now. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about kind of the Gandhi approach or the Martin Luther King approach, where you're saying, take me to jail.
Nullification.
Right, nullification, peaceful resistance. Don't just toe the line.
Yeah. Our own declaration says it's better to suffer with evils as long as the evils are sufferable.
Exactly. The guys who want to go to violence right away always spook me because they really don't know their history either, right? It wasn't like one day the founders woke up and went, we should just start a war.
No way.
This was something that went on for decades before it got to that point where there was constant seeking for redress. So nobody be too quick to do that, please. But
no, there's I've met folks who have dangerous ideas like that, like who believe that that might makes right.
Yeah,
like it's like
no,
like rights come from God. And they're like, no, rights come from whoever's got the most guns or whatever. It's like, please don't do anything.
Well, and furthermore, if you take that approach, that allows your belief that these rights are inalienable. It puts a time stamp on it, right? Yeah. I mean, If you're wiped out, that doesn't continue. But if you get on the side of God and say, look, these are from him for us. No man can take these away. That's an idea. And unlike a charismatic figure, unlike a military leader, that will perpetuate long after he is dead.
That's right. Yeah. So, yeah, ideas, good ideas last longer than military might.
Yep. Absolutely. So you said they begin to, like all these things tend to do, right? Once one guy starts it, some other people are like, yeah, I'm with that dude.
That's
and
right.
it picks up steam and momentum to the point where they start getting armor and weapons and they get stronger and they eventually overthrow Antiochus.
They do.
And this is where the story of Hanukkah really
it's absolutely incredible. There's just there's so many miracles really that take place. It kind of culminates like the last straw is Antiochus basically sends half of his entire army to Judea, and he actually takes the other half to Persia because he realizes that his the treasury is empty. So he needs to go to Persia to collect taxes, but he puts Lysias, one of his generals in charge, sends half of it, and it's actually this kind of dire moment. Like all the nations kind of around, like they like hear that half of the Greek Syrian army is headed to Jerusalem, and they all come with money and chains because they're looking forward to like buying some slaves and stuff because they know there's going to be all these prisoners and stuff, and they just all their hopes are trashed. Yeah. And then immediately after that, and then the Greek threat is gone. Then Judah's his attention turns back to the temple, and they go there, and everything is just in this grotesque disarray. They finish clearing the Jerusalem of the last Greek soldiers that are there, and just set about repairing and cleaning up the mess. So they take the all the defiled stones for the altar. They actually don't know what to do with them because they're defiled, but they're also the altar.
Right.
So they decide, well, we'll just set those somewhere to the side, and when a prophet comes, they can tell us what to do with those. But they rebuild the altar and clean up everything. Start rebuild the stuff inside, and they're ready to dedicate it. And of course they have now this story about the miracle of the oil, right, which Hanukkah is famous for, is actually not in the books of Maccabees, either first or second Maccabees, but is a story that's first told in the Talmud, which was written nearly 400 years later. So it's quite a late recollection, and so there is kind of some people doubt the truthfulness of this story. Okay. But I don't actually see any reason necessarily to. Well, there are reasons, but I actually like it. I like the story of the oil, partly because like Josephus, who was centuries before the Talmud.
Right.
Josephus actually Josephus is like a contemporary of the New Testament writers. He calls Hanukkah the Festival of Lights. So, which is interesting that he doesn't call it the Festival of
Oil.
Well, it's oil. It's oil is light.
Right.
But he doesn't. It's actually the interesting thing is that. The focus of the holiday is on this miracle of the light of the oil, and not on the military victories. Even though, if I asked you which of these made a bigger difference in the world, the military victory of this unlikely military victories of these, farmers and stuff who take on the largest empire in the world at the time. Arguably Rome was up and coming, but one of the largest empires in the world, and gain their independence, or this oil that burned a little longer than it should have. like the oil that burned a little longer than it should have didn't change the world. Like there's no history. The history books didn't deviate because of that. The history books did deviate in a big way because of the Maccabee family and their military exploits. So it's interesting that the miracle of the oil, and of course, what was it? They searched through the rubble, they're cleaning everything up, and they find one vessel of oil that's sealed, that has the seal of the high priest on it, and so they know it's has not been defiled, which in itself is a miracle. That just they were able to find that among the rubble and the squalor that the temple had become.
Now, this is to light the giant menorah.
The giant menorah, which is in the holy place. Yeah, and, seven branched. Yeah,
and this is to essentially rededicate the house of the Lord, right? This is to
That's right.
To bring this back into acceptance before God, which I don't think Maccabees gets enough credit. I mean, they get all the credit for shooing out the Greeks.
Yeah.
But they, much like our founders in some ways, right? There's several parallels there I'm looking at, but they go straight from we're spilling blood and we're at war to get rid of the dictator to now we have to rebuild.
That's right.
They just switch that gear, and that's
now we're doing this to serve God.
Exactly.
Not for our own wealth or power or fame.
And the reason I say it's interesting and kind of a parallel to the States is a lot of those men who were the founders could have had the opportunity, not could have had the opportunity to install themselves as the new aristocracy, whatever it is. But instead they're like, okay, now we got to build something better.
Yeah.
And you get that same feeling here from the Maccabees is, okay, we've done that. Now we need to restore what's been lost, right? I'm not concerned about my own power. Let's restore what was lost.
There's several places in the books of Maccabees where Judah Maccabee is very much a Captain Moroni figure.
Yeah.
And he rallies his men not over victory and spoil, but he tells them, we are fighting for our God and our families and our country and and our freedom. Like those are the things, like the exact things that Moroni puts on the title of liberty. That's what Judah Maccabees rouses his troops with as well. This is the reason they're fighting. Yeah, so they debate whether to just use up the oil they have and just get they're hungry for being able to serve God, right? And or so whether they do that and just let it burn out and then wait until they get more oil, or to just wait, and they're impatient and they're ready and everything's set, and so they decide to light the lamp. Yep, and it's and then the miracle is that it should have burned for 1 day, but it burns for 8 days until they can procure some new oil, right? And then they keep it burning because it's a commandment to keep it burning all the time. So sometimes we'll say it's the miracle where the oil lasted for 8 days, but it's actually the miracle actually lasted for 7 days, right? Because the first day wasn't miraculous, right?
Yeah.
And so, but the first day was kind of little, and then the miracle was bigger. And so, I think there's a couple reasons why this oil and the light has become kind of the focus rather than the military victory. And part of it is the military victory was extremely temporary. It was actually
because the Romans are coming right behind them.
Yep, the Romans are coming right behind them, and that happened. And even before that, like Mattathias' sons, Judas is eventually after they gained independence, there still were they had to maintain their independence, and so there was still battles. He eventually is killed, and but by the time it gets to Mattathias' last son, he is just his youngest son. He's just fully incorporates Greek ways of life. And also they do the Maccabees, basically the kingly line. They actually proclaim themselves kings, which they're not supposed to. They're the priestly line, but they make themselves they make themselves wear two hats. They're like, we are the high priest and we also are the king, and so they just have this consolidation of powers where there should have been a separation of powers between the religious and the secular.
Yeah, Deuteronomy's pretty clear on that.
But they just violate this, and everything just falls into total corruption. And again, the office of high priest is just bought and sold, and people are murdered left and right. I mentioned Onias III. He was kind of the last kind of legitimate he was really the last, in my view, the last legitimate high priest that Israel ever had in Jerusalem. All the way up until Jesus' time. Like, these are just wicked people who were put into place for political things. Herod, who's also not even Israelite. Herod's Jewish, or Herod's Arab. He appoints Egyptians and Babylonian guys to be the high priest, and people are just getting murdered left and right to become the king, and
so it becomes
all kind
less
of fratricide, and it's just awful. I can't even describe how awful it is.
It's less of a calling now and more of a political office.
Yeah, and there's nothing to celebrate there,
right?
Because it just falls apart in a generation. But the oil, though, that's something that's, even though that didn't change history, that's something like you want to know that. Yes, there has not been a prophet for several centuries, and yet we know that God has not forgotten us. Right? That He's still there. God looks down and says, "Ah, I see you. You lit that. I'm just gonna do a little something for you to let you know that I'm still there, and I see what you're doing." Interesting. In Leviticus 23, this is a place where all of the festivals throughout the year are kind of laid out, and they're laid out in order according to the year, like, and how
right,
the order that the festivals arrive in. So on verse 4, it says, "These are the feasts of the Lord, holy convocations, which ye shall proclaim in their seasons." And then it starts with the 14th day of the first month is Passover. And then the 15th day begins the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then it talks about first fruits. And then you go on to the 50 days until Pentecost. And then it talks about the seventh, let's see. In verse 24, it says, in the seventh month, on the first day of the month, there'll be Rosh Hashanah. It'll be the Feast of Trumpets, and then there's Yom Kippur, and then it describes the Feast of Tabernacles, which we talked about last time. And then, interesting, and then the chapter ends. But those chapter breaks are fairly recent.
They are very recent. Yeah.
So interesting that,
and not always put in a spot we would think of as
correct. They are sometimes placed in a misleading way.
Yeah.
So if you keep reading from Leviticus 23 on to Leviticus 24, if you were going to list the holidays that came, Hanukkah would be the next one. And of course, it's not mentioned directly, but there is a beautiful hint at it. So finish Leviticus 23 with tabernacles, and then right in chapter 24, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Command the children of Israel that they bring unto thee pure oil, olive, beaten for the light, to cause the lamps to burn continually."
Wow.
"Without the veil, outside of the veil of testimony, in the tabernacle of the congregation, shall Aaron order it from the evening unto the morning before the Lord continually. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. And he shall order the lamps upon the pure candlestick before the Lord continually. So the very next thing after, in the list of feasts, it says, and be sure you keep the menorah burning all the time.
So yeah, the Lord was mindful.
Oh yeah.
Clear back then, like, we'll give them a hint. They won't get it right now.
That's right.
But we'll put it in there so they know.
Yeah, they can look back on it and
yeah.
know that I'm in charge.
How is Hanukkah celebrated
How's
today?
it celebrated? Yeah. So that's good. So the main thing, is, it's celebrated for 8 days. Okay. And why 8 days? Well, it was partly because, the oil, which I mentioned, but in the books of, Maccabees, they actually say that this is because the festival that they most recently missed out on was Sukkot, Tabernacles, which was an 8-day thing. Okay. So this is their belated Tabernacles, basically. So, so they celebrate that, and then, so with the miracle of the oil, so a common thing is to eat fried foods. So, and deep fried foods. So all kinds of everything that's delicious. Donuts and latkes are traditional. Those potato pancakes, which are really good, and anything else too. Like we're gonna have a party on December 23rd. So I know it's close to Christmas, and people probably have a lot of family parties and stuff. But that'll be a Friday evening, and we picked that day because that's actually Joseph Smith's birthday,
yeah.
Which in 1805, that was the 8th day of Hanukkah. Okay. Joseph Smith was born on, there's some interesting symbolism there in and of itself. Like there's verses in the Doctrine and Covenants that talk about when the time of the Gentiles comes in, there'll be a light that will break forth to those that sit in darkness. And so, of course, Hanukkah is oftentimes it's in winter. It's in December usually. Sometime it floats around, but it's during this dark time of the year. And so, but then there's this light that breaks forth, in the restoration,
right?
And this is the Hanukkah lights are. If you're a Mormon, then you can just take that symbolism and it fits perfectly with the restoration of the gospel.
I'm sorry, you still have me at fried food. I'm still like, wow.
Yeah. So back to that. So we usually have we have this potluck and we're like, everyone bring fried foods. So
nice.
There's latkes, donuts, French fries. I'm going to deep fry turkey, and there'll just be
nice
all manner of goodies.
Nice.
So
have you ever had deep fried Oreos?
I have not. So if you come, I hope that you'll bring those.
Yeah, those are good. Yeah.
So and then we usually we'll read some scriptures about Jesus. Jesus celebrated this. A lot of people don't know this too, but that Jesus celebrated Hanukkah.
Yeah.
It's in the New Testament. Actually, the New Testament is aside from the books of the Maccabees, the New Testament is the earliest reference we have. Because, as I mentioned, the Talmud was written a couple hundred years after the New Testament. So the New Testament is the earliest reference. I've had people give me funny looks, when I tell them that I celebrate Hanukkah, and they're like, "Yeah, but that's like a Jewish thing, and like Christians shouldn't be doing that." I'm like, "Well, Jesus did."
Dude, here's the thing. I had that very same thought, and I've mentioned him on the show before. My buddy Joel. He's like, there's nothing that says you have to be Jewish to observe these things.
No.
And he said, my dad, who was a devout rabbi, had instructed many Christians on how to keep those. And he used to say, Christianity, in his view, was the younger brother, so to speak, of Judaism, right?
It is.
And I make the assertion you can't understand
it's a continuation.
You can't understand your own Christian faith until you go back and you really look at that.
Yeah. Actually, the first and second Maccabees are only, they're not in Protestant Bibles.
Right.
But they are in the Catholic Bible.
Yep.
And they were in Protestant Bibles for a long time too. Yep. Until I believe the Apocrypha was taken out in 1885.
Right.
Out of the King James Bible, and then of course it wasn't in any of the other NIV or anything like that as well. But yeah, and not in the Jewish canon.
Right.
So now the Jews back in Jesus' day, the early Christians, they had the Apocrypha because they had the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the scriptures that was written about this time. Oh, so many loose ends I haven't tied up. Let me read this in John first.
I keep distracting you.
No. It's Hanukkah's actually kind of an overwhelming thing. There's so much to talk about. It's really amazing. This is in John chapter 10, verse 22. Now, it's traditional. Another thing to celebrate. One of the traditional things that's done is to read Ezekiel 34. Which where the Lord is talking about how he is against the shepherds of Israel because the shepherds are just abusing the flock and enriching themselves. And that someday he's going to send a good shepherd. And so Jesus actually starts off chapter 10 talking about, like verse 11, he says, I am the good shepherd, for the good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. And he talks about the hirelings and how they don't actually take care of the sheep and all of that. And then it says it was that Jesus gives this sermon at Jerusalem. Verse 22 says, at Jerusalem, at the feast of dedication, and it was winter. Now it says dedication there, and so people maybe don't catch it, but
the dedication of the temple.
The Hebrew word Hanukkah means dedication. That is, so the festival of Hanukkah is the festival of dedication because they rededicated the temple at that time. So, and it was winter, right? So, and Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. So he was there at the temple for Hanukkah and telling, they had been reading Ezekiel chapter 34, and he tells them, hey, I'm the good shepherd.
Right. Oh, so he's proclaiming again the prophecies fulfilled.
That's right. And it's actually interesting because because of all of because of what they expected the Messiah to do, which was throw off the Romans, and this is at Hanukkah time, and so there's like they're basically expecting the Messiah to be Judah Maccabee,
right,
and do the same thing that Judah did to the Greeks to the Romans.
Right.
And so they actually ask him right then, after he says he's there for the Feast of Dedication for Hanukkah, and it says the Jews round about him said unto him, how long do you make us doubt? If you be the Messiah, tell us plainly. Just tell us up straight up. Jesus answered, I told you, and you believe not. The works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness of me, but ye believe not, because ye are not my sheep. So he's like saying, I am the good shepherd, but if you don't believe me, then you're not my sheep. I'm not the guy. I'm not the guy for you that you are looking for. Right. But my sheep do hear my voice, and I am here. Right. So there's the first reference to celebration of Hanukkah. So there's a good reason to celebrate it.
So where do the candles fit in?
Yeah, good question. This goes to the idea of the miracle of the oil and the lights, right? There's many miracles that happened, but the one that gives it its name, the Festival of Lights, is because of the oil that burned for 8 days.
That's a menorah, right?
That's a menorah. That's right. And I'm glad you knew that. The menorah is actually the name of the candelabra that's in the temple, and it's a 7-branched menorah. 7-branched candlestick, but the candelabra that's used for Hanukkah is called a Hanukkah menorah, or more formally, it's called a Hanukkah. So we have a menorah that's a 7-branched, and the Hanukkah is actually a 9-branched candlestick. And the reason why it's 9, it actually looks very similar. You've probably seen them before, but the one in the temple, the 7-branched one, it has kind of a central one that's a little taller than the rest, and then it's got 3 on each side, on the left and the right. The Hanukkah is similar design, but it has one that's a little higher, usually in the middle, although not always, and then kind of 4 branches on each side. And those 4 branches on each side, for a total of 8 branches, those are for the 8 days of Hanukkah. But then it's really interesting because there's that one candle that is elevated above the rest, and that holds the candle that is called the shamash. And the shamash is the servant candle. And that on each night of Hanukkah, on the first night of Hanukkah, you'll put one candle in the first branch, and then also a candle in the higher elevated shamash spot, the servant spot. Yeah, and then that's lit first, and then that candle, the shamash, comes down and lights the other candles.
There's so much symbolism you can draw from that, right? I mean, my first thought is that I think that sets a pattern for us, those who have received the gospel, right? We've received the light. We need to be passing that out.
Absolutely.
And I can't think of a better time of year to do that. Look, whether you celebrate Hanukkah or Christmas, everybody's a little happier. Everyone's a little more willing to talk about what they believe in. And you got to love that season.
It's kind of a season of openness.
It is, and of charity and love.
Absolutely.
And I always felt like, as a guy who kind of loves this time of year, and I mean it's a big deal around our house. We go all out. It's not for amateurs, right?
Good.
It's one of those times where I feel like as disciples of Christ, we might have a greater responsibility to spread His light this time of year, and I never knew that, and so you described this idea of a servant candle.
Yeah.
Right? I think it's beautiful.
So it's as Christians, we should certainly think about the times when Jesus said, "I am the light and the life of the world. I'm the light that came into the world." In John chapter 1, he says, John says that Jesus is the light that lights every man, right? And we're all entitled to this light of Christ, which is a source of guidance and revelation for every person who comes into the world. And that the source of that light for us comes through Christ. And so he is the ultimate servant who has condescended or come down to share the light with, as the Son of God, with his brethren here on earth, right? So there is that aspect. And then I love what you said. I was going to bring that up too, is that once we are lit, then we are also candles for the Lord. Proverbs chapter 20, we don't remember the verse, I think. Anyway, in Proverbs chapter 20, it says that the spirit of man is the candle of the Lord. That we are light, we are his lights, his representatives, and on the earth. And in a real way, we bear the image of God, and we are supposed to hold that up as a light to the world. Jesus says to not to put your candle under a bushel, right?
Right.
Yeah. The Gospel of Matthew is originally written in Hebrew, and it's the Hebrew there is, Jesus says, don't put your menorah under a bushel, but set it out on the table where it will give light to everyone in the room. And so there's a real call for us to be both grateful for the light that we have received, and also to remember that kind of responsibility that we have to share that light, to pass it along with those around us. Yeah, and we can think of both those things. So
yeah, no, that's awesome. Is there any other symbolism that goes with that?
That's those are the main things. Then of course, as I said, there are 8 branches, and so each night, and this is tradition. Of course, it's not laid out in Maccabees or in scriptures anywhere, but it's a beautiful tradition. On the first night, there will be 1 candle plus the shamash. Second night, there'll be 2 candles plus the shamash, and 3 and 4, and so each night the light just is growing, and that's just that's kind of a symbolic hope as well, that we hope that the scriptures are full of images like this. We hope for the kingdom of God to grow and to spread, and we hope for that little stone that was cut out of the mountain to roll and to grow larger and larger, and we hope that the light will get brighter and brighter. And we know that the darkness is getting deeper and deeper as well. But ideally, the children of light, as the scriptures call us, will be able to keep up with and fend off those powers of darkness and spread the light in spite of this increasing darkness. And it's interesting too, because just the time of year, of course, is in the winter, and it's near the solstice. It's not on the solstice, but Hanukkah is near the solstice, and so like the days are getting darker and darker, but we are adding a candle every night, and it's getting brighter and brighter. And another tradition about the Hanukkah, actually, and this goes with the this commandment that Jesus gives us to share our light. The tradition is that the Hanukkah is not supposed to be set up, inside your house somewhere where no one can see it. You're supposed to put it like on the windowsill,
right, so
that everyone passing by can look and see light coming out of your house, so to speak, literally, not so to speak, but and so that's there's beautiful things about that too.
And one of the things too is that, and it always becomes more pronounced around this time of year, Christmas and Hanukkah, is that it doesn't take a lot of light to make the darkness flee.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, as it gets darker, light becomes more pronounced. Yeah,
it does.
And sometimes I think we sell ourselves short that maybe we're not doing enough, but sometimes just being us, right, is and doing the best we can will not only light our way, but we don't know whose way it will light.
Yeah, amen. I mean, it does. You said it perfectly. Especially when it's dark.
Right. And I think
light stands out in an amazing way.
Yeah, and I think we're coming into a time where it's going to take all of us to be lit, so to speak. That's lit in a spiritual way, not an alcoholic kind of way. But lit in a way that this is horrible. I just immediately had visions of everyone going to booze. But anyway, for us to be enlightened, right, by the Lord's countenance, so that we can spread that around to those who are in need.
Yeah.
Because they're going to go somewhere, right? As it gets darker, they'll either fall into the darkness, or we can be the light to be like, don't go that way. There's no need.
Yeah.
We can go this way.
Humans are complex,
Oh yeah.
We're not like moths. We're just kind of blindly attracted to light and flames. But there is kind of a metaphor there, and everyone knows that feeling of coming out of the cold into the warmth, or out of the darkness into light. And there's comfort there, and there's definitely something both like physically satisfying, but also spiritually satisfying that we want some light.
Yeah.
And I think there could be more, but people are afraid sometimes.
They are, and
share it.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's really the trick, is getting over that fear. But
yeah, now there's we are having our party on the 23rd, but on the 18th. So this is on the Zarahemla calendar. Mm-hmm. This is going to be the day before. This is the Sunday. 18th is Sunday. So at in the afternoon, and this will be on the website too. But we're actually going to make candles. So I don't know if you've ever dipped.
I have not. I have not had
dipped
the pleasure.
Candles.
Yeah.
So we're gonna dip a whole set of Hanukkah candles. For anyone who wants to. And I don't remember off the top of my head now, but it's you need 2 on the first night, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So whatever that adds up to, it's 40 or 50 candles, something like that.
Wow.
That you need for one Hanukkah to have all the candles you need. So
that's
anyway,
awesome.
So that's kind of a fun activity for the kids and stuff. So.
Absolutely, that sounds great.
Another thing is eating cheese or dairy things. So also good, right? Deep fried stuff and dairy. Like what could be better than that? The reason why
I'm all in. I'm gonna have to buy some Tums. But
so we need some
in.
Going to bring some mozzarella sticks. Right. Like you get the best of both. The reason why they do that is there's actually three books in the Apocrypha that are related to the story to the Maccabees. Well, maybe more. It kind of depends, actually. There's different versions of the Septuagint that were around anciently, and not all Christian denominations agree on what the apocryphal books are supposed to be. Or they're sometimes called the deuterocanonical books, the second canon.
Right.
So anyway, it's about 15 to 18 books, but in the King James Apocrypha, there was First and Second Maccabees, but in some of the other Eastern Orthodox, I think, there's like a third and a fourth Maccabees as well, which are kind of related to the story as well. But anyway, long story short, the other book that's in the Apocrypha is the book of Judith. And so she is the niece of Judah Maccabee, and she's a widow, and she basically single-handedly saves her little city from the Assyrian army. That's have you heard of Judith or the story of Judith before? Oh, so she's this female heroine, kind of like Esther or Yael. The story of Yael in Judges, right, where she pounds a stake through the guy's head while he's sleeping. It's kind of that kind of story. But she's very beautiful. She's a widow. The cities, I'll give you the short version here. The cities is being what's it called when they barricade and they try to starve them out? Siege. Yeah, they're under siege. Thank you. And so she and their food's running out, and they're gonna die. So she the elders in the city, they say, unless God does something to save us in 5 days, we're going to surrender. And she chastises them and says, how can you put a timetable on God? You should not do this. You should be faithful and wait for God to do it whenever he's ready. But she has an idea. So she actually leaves the camp. She brings her maid with her, and she brings a bunch of food that she can. She brings a bunch of cheese and wine, and she goes to the Assyrian camp and asks to see their general, and basically tells him, "I'm going to help you take the city, and and this is how it's going to happen. So they're under siege. They're running out of food. At some point, they're going to start eating pigs and horses and unclean stuff because they're running out of food. And when they do that, then they will be breaking God's commandments, and then he won't bless them. But you have to wait until that happens. Otherwise, you won't. God will be with them, and you won't be able to take it." So the general, his name's Holofernes, he says, "Okay, great. This is great." He tells everyone in his camp, leave these two women alone, and they're going to go back to the town, back and forth in between the town and the camp every day to find out news of when they're running out of food or whatever. So she does this for a couple of nights, goes back and forth, and then finally she tells the general, she's like, "Hey, they've just run out of food, and so it's only going to be 2 days from now. Starvation is going to push them towards breaking the commandments, and then you'll be able to take the city." And he's like, "Great, this is great. Let's celebrate." And he invites her to dinner in his tent, and she's beautiful, and he wants to seduce her as well. Mm-hmm. And she knows that. She's kind of playing the seductress. And so she says, "Oh, I'd love to join you for this party." And she pulls out her basket of cheese, and she's like, "This is my homemade cheese. It's the best. And look, this is my homemade wine." And Holofernes tells all his men to leave the tent because he wants to be alone with her, right? And she basically stuffs him full of cheese and gets him slobbering drunk with this wine that she made, and he passes out. And she rolls him onto his stomach and pulls out his sword and cuts off his head while he's asleep, and then puts it in the basket where all the cheese was, and then just walks out of the tent quietly, and no one disturbs her. And she runs to the town and says, "Everyone get ready to go attack the Syrian army right now, because you need to attack them at the first light of day. They will not be expecting it. And also I have the head of their general." Right. And so they do, they go attack the Syrians, and they go to Holofernes' tent. They're like, General, they're coming. No answer.
Crickets.
Open it. The headless general is on, and they just scatter in fear and disarray. And so,
tell you what, people often say they don't read the scriptures because they find them boring, and I'm like, man, there's some straight up gangster stuff in the scriptures, right? Like there's some straight up, action film kind of stuff in there.
So Judith saves the day there, and so eating cheese is also.
That's awesome.
Is on the menu for Hanukkah.
Nice. All right. Well, dude, that's good stuff. I'll definitely be there for the 23rd. That sounds fun. What would we miss? Would we gloss over in me constantly distracting you with my questions? And stuff?
You did good. Oh, I was going to mention one last thing.
Sure.
One of the reasons why Martin Luther and other Protestants didn't really like the Apocrypha was because of Second Maccabees, and that was kind of understandable because Martin Luther with the 95 Theses, he saw these abuses that were happening with indulgences, and part of the abuse was that the Pope was basically saying, "Hey, if you give me some more money, then I'll give you a little certificate that says that your relative can take some time off of their sentence in purgatory."
Wow.
Yeah. And so he did not he saw these tremendous abuses, and basically the Pope holding the salvation of people's dead relatives over them in order to milk money out of them. Right. And so he did not like that. But he basically said, Martin Luther's like, we can't do anything for the dead. We have no power over their salvation or whatever. But in 2 Maccabees chapter 12, I think, there's this episode. I'm just going to read it.
Sure.
It's pretty amazing. If you're a Mormon, you'll appreciate this, obviously. So after so there's this battle. Let's see. Yeah. After the battle, Judas led his men. This is in verse 38 of chapter 12, like I said. 2 Maccabees. After the battle, Judas led his men to the town of Adullam. It was the day before the Sabbath, so they purified themselves according to Jewish custom, and they observed the holy day. By the following day, it was urgent that they gather up the bodies of the men who had been killed in battle and bury them in their family tombs. Now, this is interesting because they, Judah and his men, they had kind of some stripling warrior kind of battles where no one was injured. They just killed hundreds of Greeks and not a single one of them was injured. So in this particular battle, it's talking about, it was again pretty much everyone was unscathed, but there was this handful of guys who died. So anyway, so it was urgent that they gather up the bodies of the men who had been killed in battle and bury them in their family tombs. But on each of the dead, hidden underneath their clothes, they found small images of the gods worshipped in Jamina, which the law forbids Jews to wear. So they had these little idols around their neck, right? And so they praised the ways of the Lord, the just judge, who reveals what is hidden, and they begged him that this sin might be completely blotted out. So they're praying for the dead. Then Judas, that great man, urged the people to keep away from sin because they had seen for themselves what had happened to those men who had sinned. And he also took up a collection from all his men, totaling about 4 pounds of silver, and sent it to Jerusalem to provide for a sin offering. Judas did this noble thing because he believed in the resurrection of the dead. And if he had not believed that the dead would be raised, it would have been foolish and useless to pray for them. But in his firm and devout conviction that all of God's faithful people would receive a wonderful reward, Judas made provision for a sin offering to set free from their sin those who had died.
Wow.
So he's basically doing vicarious work for the dead, but they're doing the Aaronic ordinances,
right?
But they're doing sacrifice, sin offerings vicariously for these men.
That's so cool, and that's one of those things where it's I've said for a long time, it's one of the reasons I love talking to Ken Peterson and Hannah Stoddard is that as Mormons we have every right and every reason to believe that our faith is historical, right? And that just shows there. For so long, we hung vicarious work on the dead alone on what Paul says about,
Right. In Corinthians about
But
baptism.
you have it all the way back in the temple.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the Old Testament period, vicarious work for the dead. As Mormons, we should expect to see that. And I think as more and more books, and this is the other thing people forget about the Apocrypha, it's growing all the time. As we discover more and more ancient texts, it's growing all the time. And so in doing so, we're starting to see certain Mormon teachings being brought to the forefront in ancient documents. I think it's absolutely awesome. So,
okay,
awesome.
That's all I've got, I think.
Well, I just want to wrap up with this: is that we all have holidays that are familiar to us because that's how we were brought up, right?
Right.
Those Jewish ones, maybe not so much, but I see no reason at all where you can't have Christmas and Hanukkah too.
Yeah.
There is nothing there that tells me that those things can't go together and have crossover in
There's
symbology.
no Christmas without Hanukkah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so I know I have certainly been enriched as I've studied out the Jewish calendar, because so many of them walk hand in hand.
Yeah.
I think you can definitely see God putting types and shadows here until we got a better handle on things. And so this season, just read Second Maccabees. It's an inspiring story. I mean, it's the kind of story Mel Gibson was trying to get. He was trying to get a Maccabees movie.
Oh, really?
Made.
Oh, it would make a great movie.
It'd make a great movie. It's very Braveheart-esque, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, and so I in doing research for this episode, I found that he's got a full script that's waiting for someone to want to.
That's cool.
Yeah. So I mean,
get out your dreidels.
Yes.
That's another thing I forgot about celebration.
Yeah.
The dreidels, of course. The dreidel game. Has the Hebrew letters on it, and the Hebrew letters are actually an acronym for a sentence.
Okay.
There's a Nun, Gimel, Hey, and a Shin.
Okay.
So those are the four letters around it, but it stands for a Hebrew sentence. Nes Gadol Haya Sham. Nes is miracle. Gadol is great. Haya is occurred or was, and Sham means there. So the when you spin the dreidel, it says it goes around and around and around, saying a great miracle happened there.
Huh.
So that's
awesome.
Anyway, you can look up the rules.
Yep.
But it's a fun game. We like to play it, and
that's awesome.
Anyway.
All right, so
Good stuff.
So the Hanukkah party on the 23rd.
Yep.
And they can get all that info at the Zarahemla Facebook page, I assume?
Yep. Yeah, I don't know if it's been posted yet. Probably has been, but we'll probably start 5 or 6 in the evening. And
awesome. And the first and second book of Maccabees, that's where they can read all about it.
And the book of Judith also highly recommend.
Okay. And then what about if someone is interested in kind of keeping Hanukkah, where can they find information on that?
Yeah, again, I'll say the same things I've kind of said before. There's a website called Hebrew for Christians.
Okay,
that's really good, and there's a number of other books that you can get that just have kind of a brief beginner's synopsis of the biblical feasts, and even biblical feasts from a Christian point of view. And there's a number of excellent ones. So just go on Amazon or whatever.
Awesome. All right. Well, dude, that's great. Next one's Purim. And,
that's right.
Let me ask
Esther.
Let me ask you this question: when is Hanukkah this year?
So it's I was afraid you were going to ask that. I want to say that it starts on the about the 18th of December.
Okay.
And goes to like the 25th or 26th, maybe. So
there you go.
They overlaps with Christmas this year.
Nice.
So I don't have the exact dates, but it's about that.
Okay. You can find that online too real easily.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, go read Maccabees. I feel like that book too is really good to read towards the end of the year, those books, because it kind of fires you up and gets you ready for whatever's coming the next year. But all right, Joshua, dude, it's always awesome. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Man. All right. Bye, everybody.